Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. Most times when you're cutting dovetails, you're aiming for a perfect 90-degree corner. Cutting angled dovetails by hand opens up a whole new bunch of possibilities. Stay with us. I'm going to show you how to do it. I'm Rob Cosman, and welcome to my shop. We make it our job to help take your woodworking to the next level. If you're new and you haven't subscribed, please do so. Hit the notification bell so you'll receive alerts when we release a new video. And anytime we use a special tool, we'll always leave a description down below. All right, let's get to work. However, if you're building something like a step stool, adding a little bit of an angle or splay to those dovetails makes for a much more sturdy platform. However, it also increases a lot of strength. The more that splays out, the more stress there is on that joint. So a good dovetail with lots of glue surface is the key to having a really strong corner joint on something like a step stool. So what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through the process of taking two pieces of pine, and we're going to decide what angle we want to use, and we'll go through and I'll show you there's just a few differences, but they're important enough that you need to know them. And hopefully we'll come out with a perfect angled dovetail so you can make yourself a good stool. First thing we have to do is decide how much splay do we want. And start again.
Okay, go.
So the first thing we have to determine is how much splay do we want. So what I'm going to do is use my sliding T-bevel and my protractor, and I'll start off with 5 degrees, and then I'll set the sliding T-bevel off of that. Needs a little bit of tension. Okay, lock that. Now we'll put this in place, and then I'm going to clamp this on. Now holding this piece level, put that piece up and decide, is that enough splay? Actually, I think it is for this purpose. Let's try going out just a little bit more. I'll just measure it afterwards. So I'm going to pull that out what I think is just a few degrees more. And try that. Okay, so for stability purposes, if this was a stool or something like that, that would probably be good. So let's measure this and see what it says. So that is coming in at 8 degrees. So we'll go over to the table saw and we'll cut this at 8 degrees. And then we're going to cut this one across the top at 8 degrees. All right, now we'll mark this top, and we'll put the tails on here. And then this is going to be, well, we'll call it the bottom, and this will have the pins. Okay, with the ends cut, we start off with the tails. We're going to set our marking gauge for the thickness. But the problem you're going to run into is when you go to mark on this side, you're okay. But because of the slope, your cutter is not going to make a mark in here. So that's why I'm going to use a larger diameter cutter. This is 5/8 versus 7/16. So the first thing I'll do is drop that down and measure the thickness of the piece, and they're both the same, so it's not going to make a difference. And I'll come along here and scribe a line, which will be the base of my tails. Then I need to scribe a line on the edge, since this part gets cut off. Do the same thing over here. Now, in order to have some reference edge that I normally cut with a skew block plane, I'm going to use tape on this one. So I'm going to take several strips of, this is automotive painter's tape. I'm just going to lay them on top of each other. I'll use 4. Now, the gauge line is sitting around somewhere here. I did that on purpose because we're going to cut a lot of this off, but I'll trim the edge first. Then I'll come in and cut through that tape. Usually takes multiple passes. Then we'll lift this off. And I like this automotive painter's tape. It's got a little more stick, and it's a little more robust than normal masking tape. Now, before we do anything else, we're going to go in here. Well, actually, while we have this, we may as well go ahead and mark the pin board. Now, that's only going to get marked on the 2 faces. Now we can go in here and do our layout using a pair of dividers. And if you haven't seen the layout, we go in great detail in other videos, and we'll leave that a link at the bottom. I find it a lot more accurate if you keep your square referencing off of the pointed end as opposed to down here. I don't know why, but I like the fact that it's meeting right in there where the beam meets the blocky end. Now, my spacing on this, I kept the pins purposely a little bit heavier just because of the amount of pressure that's going to be on this joint. Now, if you need to, you can go in and lay out the angled face, although this does not want to sit in there. Okay, so here's the layout's done. Now I'm going to go ahead and identify with an X which side of the line we actually saw on. Now you got to remember when you make these cuts that you're going to be cutting down past that line if you keep your saw level. So you've got to maintain that 8-degree slant we have. So I'm going to raise this up a little bit higher than I normally would because of that. I always want to make sure it's standing plumb. We'll go ahead and make these cuts. Most important part, obviously, is making the plumb cut, the square cut across the end of the board. It helps by setting your saw on there and just kind of getting a feel for where that angle is in terms of the saw. And then if you can kind of keep that in your hand, when you get to the bottom, you should be just reaching the line on the backside. Okay. Don't cut your waste off yet. Now I'm going to take a chisel and I'm just going to clean off this fuzz. And I'm also going to take note of which cuts didn't make it all the way down. Probably should have done that before I took it out, but it's going to make it a lot easier to mark if our cuts are all the way. So this part is done a little bit differently, not much. Take our pin board, sometimes easier just to put something on top, pull that up underneath so that it's flush with the top of the plane, but now I can't use that anymore because of this slope. So what I'm going to do is set this board on here and then just use a scrap of wood, come in and find the spot where it offers support. Now, the tape will provide us with a little ledge to work on. I'm going to use my offset, hold that in place. Since we moved the tail board to my left, we go to the right side of each tail, and just to make it easy to remember, I'm going to put a T on each tail. So I'm going to go to the right side of the tail, reach down, and drag the dovetail marking knife through that. This is why you want to make sure that your cuts on the underside or on the inside went all the way to the line. And we got to go the other way, meaning so the little offset's going to allow us to push this over till we make contact, hold it in place. Now if we move the tail board to my right, we're going to go to the left side of each tail. And reach down. Okay, take that away, and we know exactly where we're going to put our saw. I'm going to bring that up first. I'm going to come in and take a square. We'll just get rid of that fuzz. Leave that nice and flat. And just continue that line. Okay, we'll identify the parts that we're going to remove with an X. Now, we want these cuts to be perfectly plumb. So for that reason, I'm going to make sure that the board is standing plumb. Lower it in the vise so that it doesn't vibrate when you're sawing. Lock that in firmly. Now we can start our, actually, you know what, with that angle like that, it's going to be a little more comfortable if we raise that up a little higher than I normally would. That'll just give us clearance on the heel of the saw. Keep the sawdust out of the teeth. Remember your angle. Nice thing about this is instead of having to focus on the top and on the face, once you're sitting in the groove that you've already established, you just have to focus on getting that cut nice and plumb by following that line. Now, if we examine this real quickly, we notice that we drifted away from the line here, here, here. So you can fix them with a chisel afterwards, or you can fix them now with a saw. And the nice thing about fixing them with the saw is that the saw doesn't pay attention to grain nearly as much as a chisel does. So what I'm going to do, and I still have this to reference against, meaning the waste, put my saw down in that kerf, and then put a little bit of pressure this way so that the teeth are cutting more on the right side than they are on the left. And I'm leveraging against this, so I'm not marking up anything I'm going to keep. And I'll just slowly saw down to the line, bearing on that surface. It needs just a little bit pared off of it. All right, now we can go ahead and remove the waste. Okay, now to remove the waste for the half pin, just take a little cut with the chisel in the waste up against the gauge line. Then when you set your saw in there, you can lean it right up against that wall and make a nice plumb cut. Now, clean these up with the chisel. First thing I'm going to do is come in here and check or finish this one by getting right into that corner. I'm going to make sure there's no material left sitting above the gauge line. If there is, it'll cause the joint to kick apart when you assemble. This one I think I do. I do. See that fuzz sitting up above the gauge line? We've got to get rid of that. So we'll put that in position. See if we can find the little knife line left by the gauge line, and then you can reference your chisel on that and then just pare straight in. Get that corner nice and clean. Okay, and the rest of this waste just gets chopped out the normal way we do. And when you're chopping, you really want to make sure that you keep that surface in between the tails either flat or slightly concave. And because we're working on an angled surface, you have to remember that. And if you need to, just come over here to the end, the shoulder that you just did, and that'll kind of give you a feel for where that 8 degrees is. And you'll notice I left quite a bit of material from the fret saw, and that's just because it's the habit of cutting regular dovetails and keeping that saw level is a tough habit to break. Finish from the face side. Remember, we're going to slope the other way now. Get that chisel. Now put that in the vise, keeping it up high, and that'll allow me to go in and clean up those corners. I always work front to back. Now, before we let this go, I'm going to put a straight edge on there to make sure there's no bump in the middle. You want your straight edge to be resting, ideally it would be resting on the entire surface like it does there. However, here, as long as it's resting on the two outside surfaces and not teetering on anything in the middle, then we know the joint will go together. And the last step is to choke up on the chisel and come in here and just chamfer the inside edges, starting about a 1/16 of an inch in. Don't start out here. It'll leave a triangular hole in your joint. But by doing this, and you chamfer down the side, not on the top, that'll help distribute the glue more efficiently, and it'll also help in easing the joint together when you first begin the assembly. Okay, now we'll repeat the process on the pin board. All right, final check before we assemble. Make sure if you set a square like this on there that it's nice and flat. You do not want it wobbling in the middle. If there's a bump, that's going to prevent the joint from closing. I just found something right there, so just go in. I'm starting just inside the joint, or the edge, the front edge, and I can simply remove that by hollowing it out ever so slightly. Okay. Okay. Now we'd already checked this one, so we're ready to put it together. Okay, you want to make sure you get glue on all of the long grain surfaces. Now, my only exception to the rule of end grain, or long grain, is I always like to put a little bit on those outside shoulders. Now we go ahead and put that in position. It's always best to start it by hand before you start applying the pressure of a mallet or a hammer. Remember, this is on an angle, so keep your mallet hitting flat on the face of the tails. I'm just going to put that on there to keep the glue from splattering. Now I want to make sure that we're seated at the bottom. I'm going to pull this up just a bit. Okay, that's closed. Our gaps, and no gaps over here in those shoulders. Now, we'll give that a couple of seconds to dry. That's enough. And then flush it up and see how we did. A little wax on the sole of the plane just reduces the friction. Make sure we don't have too much projection. Still see a bit of ink. And we can flush up the edges. Here we go. There's our splayed dovetail. If you enjoy my method of work and like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. Now, I've always said, better tools make the job so much easier. If you click on the icon with the plane and the chisel, it'll take you to our website, introduce you to all of our tools that we actually manufacture right here, as well as our workshops, both in person and online. Good luck.